Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of Jeff Drawing. I am Jeff Morin, your host and artist of this work in which you are watching. And this is sped up, so don't be alarmed if it goes a little fast. It's about 4 times as fast. But today, in case you haven't already guessed by the title of this video, I'm drawing Wolverine, and specifically I'm drawing the movie Wolverine based on Hugh Jackman. And I say based because I'm not really doing a caricature of a portrait of him. I do use some photos as reference to get his costume right and all of that, but he's Hugh Jackman-esque in his face. I think it takes a little bit more time and effort to make it look like the character, and I kind of looked at some photos and got a feel for how his face is structured, but I didn't really want to bother with trying to make it look exactly like him, and so I didn't bother with it. But this drawing is a promotional piece of artwork for my podcast, Questionable Taste, that I do with my friend Dylan DeWart, or Dylan Duarte, as he says. He's fancy like that. But we do this podcast now. It's a new thing. We're about 8 episodes in, and we take movies that are kind of poorly rated by the public and by critics, and either or, and defend them. There's a lot of movies that we've seen over the years that we think deserve more credit, and X-Men 3 is one of those movies. It gets lumped in with the likes of the first Wolverine movie, which in my opinion was very, very bad, and I don't think X-Men 3 was all that terrible. Not a perfect movie, of course, but it's not deserving of the hate that it's gotten over the years. So that's one of the movies we've defended on the podcast. We've done Superman Returns, Terminator Salvation. We just finished an episode where we did Last Action Hero, and that's all available now at qtastepodcast.com, or you can look us up on iTunes and Stitcher. But it's exciting. I'm having a lot of fun doing it. I wish that's something I could just do for a living. I love drawing for a living, don't get me wrong, but there's just something really satisfying about producing a podcast. The only unsatisfying thing is listening to my voice later, and all the weird things that I say or say wrong. But yeah, anyway, back on track here. I'm drawing Wolverine, movie-style Wolverine, in Manga Studio, as usual, as the majority of my videos are. It's my preferred program for doing art. I don't know what it is. Photoshop, the newer version of Photoshop, or not the newest version, the one that I have, it just doesn't cut it for me. I recently pulled out my old tablet laptop that I have. It's older, and decided to sort of try drawing, because it draws on the screen. It has a Wacom pen, so eventually I want to upgrade here sometime in the near future and get a Wacom Cintiq to draw with. And I started using Photoshop on that laptop, but I think part of the reason it was like really clunky, and the pressure sensitivity wasn't working very well, and part of that reason I think is that maybe the laptop was a little slow, but it's I installed Manga Studio on it and started drawing in it, and everything worked real nice. I think just Manga Studio does the drawing tools, like the brush tool and the pencil and all that, much better than Photoshop does. And that's why I like it. There's definitely some tools in Photoshop, I've talked about this before in previous videos, that I wish were in Manga Studio, but Manga Studio for the most part great for drawing, great for illustrating. I don't know if there's a version that does vector graphic stuff, but I have Illustrator for that, and depending on what the project's for, I'll mainly use this and just draw on a really high resolution. The beauty of Manga Studio also is that you can draw in a very high res and get these really smooth lines. With Photoshop, you have to zoom in at 300-400% to really make your line smooth enough. And if you have a line that is very long, say you're drawing an 11 by 17 sized illustration at 300 DPI, that's a lot of pixels. And so zooming in that far, so if I was doing, say, the big line on Wolverine's arm or on his body, and I wanted that to be unbroken, that's hard to do with that's hard to do with Photoshop and having to zoom in that far, because you're just able to draw a little bit of the line at a time. And so in Manga Studio, it has a brush stabilization setting that you can set, various numbers, and it makes it's not like a post-correction sort of thing like Illustrator has, where you draw the line and then when it, it sort of figures out how smooth it should be. It actually follows your hand, but it doesn't make it as wobbly in Manga Studio. And I love it. I think it just is really helpful, because I can zoom way out and actually just draw the whole thing, or do those really long lines without having to worry about being zoomed into my image real far. And I was noticing that, I thought, if I had a Cintiq or a tablet monitor, that it would be easier and I wouldn't have to zoom in. I could draw with Photoshop, and the funny thing is on that laptop I still had to zoom in for it to feel stable, even though I'm drawing directly on the screen. It's a little better, but it's still, there's something that's not quite clicking. It also could be that this tablet laptop is pretty old. It's one that I bought probably, maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago. I don't know. Before tablets were the thing, before Microsoft had, the Surface and all that stuff. That wasn't a thing, so this was kind of state of the art at the time. I was wanting to try it out. I needed a laptop, and so I spent a little extra money to get that, and then basically never used it to draw. I did some sketches, and I never really used it for drawing. But yeah, anyway, you'll see here I'm working on Wolverine. I always start out with the pencil sketches, and the thing that I like about drawing digitally is that you can really start going for it, and you can go quickly, you can move quickly. Obviously the video is sped up, but you don't have to worry about making as many mistakes, and you don't have to worry about erasing. I actually use a dry brush for my base layers there, my pencil art, because it feels like a pencil more than the pencil brushes do, and there's something about it, the way it looks and feels. It doesn't really make sense to use a rough textured brush when I'm going to be inking over it with a smoother brush like I am here, because it is digital. But there's something about my brain needs to feel like I'm drawing with pencil. And the reason you draw with pencil in real life, if you're going to go over it with ink, is so that you can erase those pencil lines, so you have a nice clean ink drawing. But when you're doing stuff digitally with Photoshop and in Manga Studio like this, you have layers, and so you can draw a bunch of layers. Oftentimes I start with a blue layer, which I draw, and then I turn the transparency down, and I go back over that with red, and then I turn that transparency down, and then I ink over it. Sometimes there will be a third or fourth layer, depending on how complicated the piece of art is, and I need to keep tweaking and correcting things. And I always make the pencil lines different colors on each layer, so I can differentiate between each one. And then in the end, you get a nice smooth ink drawing, which I in turn color with, I'll throw in some flats. We jumped ahead here because it's boring to watch, but I just use the fill tool and fill in these color layers that are kind of a mid-tone. I like it to be kind of a mid-tone and not super dark. I guess it kind of depends on how you're coloring it. There's some stuff I've learned about coloring comic books a long time ago where you're coloring with light, so you start with the darkest tone. So I guess this would be the darkest tone for this specific drawing, but it's something a little it's kind of in between. I don't know. I always I don't detail as much, I think, in my coloring work as like a professional comic artist or something would. And I like things to be a little like well lit and bright. And I let the line work do a lot of the work as far as like showing the shapes and stuff. So sometimes if I start with a really dark color that's like this base shadow, you'll see here how I'm adding the lighter tones with that airbrush. And if I could start darker and have like a really harsh light on Wolverine if I wanted to, but I find that sometimes that doesn't really work in my artwork, mainly because of the way I draw, because it's kind of cartoony, and it sort of lends itself to sort of a flatter look. But this particular drawing, and a lot of the drawings that I do, I like to add little details and stuff, so I can't just do flat color. I can't do like a cell shaded animation thing. I mean, I could, but I don't think it wouldn't look as good. I like to kind of add like form and shape with the color, and it really adds something to the drawing. That's something that took a long time for me to get good at. I used to just do those flat colors in my comic books and stuff like that, my web comics, and I'd try little tricks and stuff, but it was hard. And I think maybe over in the last 2 years, I've really sort of gotten a method down that I think really works for me. I've tried a lot of different techniques and stuff. So if you're somebody who's learning to draw, my method might not work for you, because that's the thing I did. I was trying to find something that looked good with my art style, and you kind of have to figure out, okay, when I color my drawings, I need to figure out what method sort of matches my art style. If you're somebody that uses the black line art to create shadow and stuff. So if you're a comic book artist, like say John Cassidy or a Brian Hitch, who uses the blacks to sort of kind of help imply that form and stuff, the colorist needs to sort of use that as a basis for their color, and they kind of do more of a realistic rendering, because those black lines are acting as shadows on the face. So it's like sort of a high contrast photograph almost when you look at it. But my artwork, being more cartoony, these lines exist to help imply the form and the shape of the drawing, and don't quite act as shadows. There's line weight, which helps to sort of like tell you where a shadow might exist or where a darker area might exist. So where the line is thicker, that would be like maybe the lower part of the arm where the shadow falls or something. But for the most part, you don't want to render it like a photo realistically, because then that line art is sort of just sitting on top of what looks like a digital painting, and it doesn't quite work well. But yeah, so that's my those are my drawing info for this episode. Doing X-Men, the X-Men episode was a lot of fun. I had a lot to say. The X-Men episode of my podcast, and the X-Men movies, they're dear to me. They're the first truly good adaptation of a comic book movie, I feel like, in many, many years. I grew up in the 90s. We had Batman and the old Donner Superman movies, which are great films. But as a comic book nerd, I wanted more. And, all we got were kind of low budget, not so good renditions of Superman or superheroes like Steel and Spawn and things of that nature. And so when X-Men came out, I was pretty stoked. The funny thing about the movie is that it's such a weird concept. You would think that a movie studio would start with a Spider-Man or Captain America or something like that. Something that maybe would be more marketable and relatable to audiences. But they went with X-Men. And then maybe it had something to do with the popularity of the cartoon at the time. I think the cartoon probably wasn't on anymore, but the cartoon in the 90s was a pretty big deal. And it probably helped the X-Men comic books and everything, help their popularity. But it was cool. I mean, this came out when I saw the first photos of it. It was like every character looked like the characters. I mean, they didn't have the costumes or anything. They had these uniforms, but it didn't matter. They still looked like the characters. I mean, Patrick Stewart as Professor X was like a dead-on perfect casting. Ian McKellen had the helmet and stuff as Magneto. They even gave Cyclops the visor. Hugh Jackman as Wolverine, he had the cat hair, the hairstyle that nobody in their right mind would ever in their life do to themselves. It makes no sense. But they gave it to him. So it was really cool. And, I still to this day think the first X-Men movie is good. I'm sure there's people that criticize it. It's not a perfect movie, but at the time it was pretty great. It was, obviously Bryan Singer and the writers of the movie, they loved the X-Men. They cared about those characters and the story, and really made like the first comic book movie in a long time that really gave the fans what they wanted, I think, and sort of set a standard from there on out. I mean, Sam Raimi's Spider-Man kind of came along and stole its thunder, I think, and was sort of it was like Hollywood needed two super successful superhero movies to decide whether or not they wanted to continue, and so Spider-Man gets a lot of credit for igniting the superhero movie craze, but I would say that X-Men pulled it off first, and they were the first to do it, and it was great. I love it. I like the whole series, even X-Men 3, like I said. The only movie that I'm not fond of is that Wolverine movie, because I think it was kind of a big departure from the tone that was set up in the other movies, and was way goofy and overstuffed with stupid things that we didn't need. And to tell Wolverine's origin in that way was kind of like not understand. It's like they didn't understand the character. Like, I never really got the feeling that he was the Wolverine that we know and love. Like, he seemed like a big softie in that, and it's like there's too many changes. I was just remembering today about the one other live-action version of the X-Men before the X-Men movie, and that was Generation X on the Fox network. They had it was kind of pitched as a TV movie, but I think it was a thing where they were trying to make it into a series, and they hadn't greenlit any other additional episodes. But it was Generation X, based on the comic book of the same name. And I remember just being totally fascinated by it and totally excited about it. And it's funny because as a kid, I wasn't really into the X-Men. I wasn't into the cartoon that much. But just having a live action, that's the thing. Is like, everybody gripes now about oh, they don't use they don't have comic accurate costumes in the X-Men movie, or they don't, they don't this or that, or they got this thing wrong or whatever. But in the 90s, we had Generation X, which was not a very good show. Not a good television movie, whatever. They whitewashed Jubilee in that, and I'm not sure why. I think that I didn't know at the time that she was supposed to be an Asian character. I thought that I just thought she had dark hair because I only had ever seen the cartoon, and the drawing of her in the cartoon, you can't really tell. I mean, when you have a sort of a minimalist drawing for animation, it's hard to get any subtle features to tell someone's ethnicity or whatever, and so she looked like Jubilee to me, but then I later found out Jubilee in the comic books is an Asian, and they had done that. I don't know how accurate it was to the Generation X comic book, but it was still kind of cool. They went to Xavier's School for the Gifted, but the headmaster and headmistress at the school were Emma Frost and Banshee, which was kind of also neat. But the movie was real boring and everything, and they didn't even have X-Men uniforms or anything like that until the very end scene, which was kind of, I guess, setting up a series of some kind. But that's what we had before. That was the first ever live-action take on X-Men. It's kind of funny to think about now. I kind of almost want to go track it down and watch it again just to see what it was like. But yeah, that's what we got. That's the kind of thing I was excited about. But now we have X-Men. We have the real deal. We have a billion different X-Men movies. But yeah. Anyway, we're getting to the end of the video here. I want to thank everybody for watching. I'll probably be doing more of these little promotional images in the future because I am doing them we release our podcast every other week. And so on those off weeks, I'm illustrating these little promotional images. But yeah, check us out again. Check out that podcast, qtastepodcast.com. You can follow me on Twitter. I'm at MilkmanJeff. Yeah, subscribe, like this video, all that stuff. I would love it. Thank you very much. And I'll see you next time.